Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of HBO's The Last of Us Episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness. Based on the Naughty Dog games written by Neil Druckman and co-created by Druckman and Chernobyl writer Craig Mazin, this series hits the heartbreaking survivalist horror notes from my favorite arcs of The Walking Dead. I'm just loving the show, so let's break it down scene by scene for all the visual details that you might have missed, all the little choices that make the show so good. Also, Break Room hosts Brandon, Jessica, and Anna covered the differences from the games in their after show. Give that a watch along with Anna's full explanation of everything you need to know going into the series. And a reminder to subscribe to our new channel, The Deep Dive, launching February 17th, in which every week I will be digging even deeper into select titles like Everything Everywhere All at Once with a more investigatory focus, while I continue to break down Easter eggs here on New Rockstars. Okay, this premiere episode opens with a prologue that's actually not in the games, a 1968 talk show discussing global pandemics.
And that's your biggest worry?
Yes, any kind of virus, but most probably something similar to influenza.
Because of air travel?
Through the air. Coughing.
I'm sorry, I meant people on planes. That was something you described in your book.
Now, in history, this would have been one of the earliest broadcasts about epidemiology, a topic that we are all now familiar with, having lived through COVID. But by setting this opening scene in the 1960s, this series sets our notions of pandemics as a bit antiquated and instead presents an alternate history in which things could have played out very differently. One hypothetical forgotten because viruses are really what we feared from here forward, not fungi. Also, Ellie later deduces that the 60s songs on the radio are Joel's smuggler code with Bill and Frank, meaning nothing new. So this might be the show's way of saying this is really nothing new. We have known about all these natural threats for decades. This opening TV broadcast also evokes the TV broadcast that opened I Am Legend with Emma Thompson as a doctor in the past proclaiming the cure for cancer, which led to that present-day viral outbreak. The host of this TV show is played by Josh Brenner, Big Head from Silicon Valley, and the fungus fearer Dr. Newman is played by Josh Hanna, who played the brother in the Mummy films and a number of other great roles. He talks about a fungus that infects the mind of an ant, theorizing that such fungi could evolve to infect humans due to rising global temperatures.
One gene mutates, and an Ascomycetia, Candida, ergot, Cordyceps, Aspergillus, any one of them could become capable of burrowing into our brains and taking control not of millions of us, but billions of us.
The camera cuts to Newman right on Cordyceps, because that is the name of the real-world ant-infecting fungus that Neil Druckman based the fungus of The Last of Us games on, and it is the fungus of this story. He goes on to warn,
billions of puppets with poisoned minds, permanently fixed on one unifying goal: to spread the infection to every last human alive by any means necessary.
So if that happens,
we lose.
And during all this, the camera shows the studio audience, who look fully nonplussed and unafraid, dull-eyed puppets just ready for the taking. Now, the awesome-looking opening title animation mirrors the fungal spread that's set to haunting acoustic notes strummed by composer Gustavo Santaolalla, just like the animation that opens the games. Gustavo also composed the great music in the games, and here he works with David Fleming. But this spreading of the Cordyceps fungus reminds us of other HBO openings like Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, like it's spreading across a world map, rising its own fungal city structures that supplant our human civilization. Eventually, the fungus actually takes the shape of a map of the continental United States. And it's subtle, but you can actually see tiny spores floating from stalk to stalk. And two of the stalks take the shape of a taller person and a shorter person, representing Joel and Ellie, the focal characters of this story. Now, The Last of Us is really one of the better versions of the whole lone wolf and cub relationship, which of course Pedro Pascal also played really well in The Mandalorian. Now, the first half of this pilot episode follows Joel's daughter, Sarah, in 2003 Austin, Texas, the way part one of the game's prologue follows Sarah. But we spend a lot more time with Sarah on the show, which is the show's way of saying just because we get to know characters for extended sequences doesn't mean this show is not gonna kill them off. This is survivalist horror. It's called The Last of Us. Oh, and by the way, if you have not played the games and you don't want to get spoiled about what happens, I'm gonna save my speculation for details that might set up currently unestablished plot points known from the games or from the comics in the segment at the end. So if you don't know anything about what happens in the future of this story, don't worry, I'm not gonna spoil anything in these breakdowns. Now, the open window blows a gentle breeze to wake up Sarah, and there are some tiny particles floating over her nose, but to be clear, Neil Druckman did clarify that they decided that instead of spreading via airborne spores, this fungus is gonna spread via these creepy oral tendrils. It is actually inspired by concept art from the game. In the game, Sarah reads a newspaper where it suggested that the fungus came from crops imported from South America, but here the radio newscaster mentions disturbances in Jakarta and riots and warnings for all Americans to get out of there, suggesting that the origin in the show might be from Indonesia or somewhere else in Southeast Asia, one of the countries bordering the Indian Ocean. Now, thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. You remember that moment in Endgame where Cap's all alone facing off against Thanos and then everybody shows up to help, there is a reason we all cheered so hard when that happened. Someone we love got help, and it was such a relief. Getting help is good, and now, thanks to BetterHelp, getting help is easy too. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, just answer a few questions about what you need and what your preferences are for therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you to the right therapist from their network. Once that is done, you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message a therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. BetterHelp lets you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom picked for you, with more scheduling flexibility and at a more affordable price. To get 10% off your first month, you can scan the QR code or click the link in the description, or just go to betterhelp.com/newrockstars. That's betterhelp.com/newrockstars for 10% off your first month of therapy. But throughout the first step of this episode, the story beats are very similar. Sarah celebrating Joel's birthday and fixing his watch as a gift, Joel fretting over a contracting job. Notice how Joel slaps his wrist after accidentally checking it for the time, a little nod that he misses having a watch that works properly, something Sarah has likely noticed. Also, in the background of this living room of this house is Joel's guitar. Joel's playing of the guitar is something that becomes very important later on in the games and probably of the show. Now, a lot of the dialogue is taken directly from the game, like Sarah later joking that she sold drugs to pay for the watch, Joel pretending that the watch didn't work, so I'm not gonna point out every time a line or something is from the game exactly, but Sarah's shirt is interesting to point out. This is the same pink Halligan Drops shirt, but instead of the 2010 tour, it's now the 2002 tour. Because in the games, it takes place in 2013. In this show, the flashback takes place in 2003. Also, really cool detail, in the game, most of the tour stops on that shirt are locations you later visit in the game. Boston, Pittsburgh, Jackson, Salt Lake City, etc. All the details are very 2003 though, like a Destiny's Child Survivor poster on Sarah's wall. She's got a band tour shirt with 2002 on it. There's Dido's white flag on the radio, and in the classroom, a president, a good old George W. Bush, who before becoming president was governor of the great state of Texas. So they might have already had his photo on their wall. And in the classroom, Sarah gets distracted by this glare.
Some knowledge, shaking of heads. I swear you will use this later in life. Believe me, that's why you're here. Okay? So, use the subject, ongoing, predicate, verb.
The kid's wrist is twitching, muscle spasms being an early symptom of infection. Also, a subtle cough before the bell rings there. I love how they build the tension, because they know that we watching this are now a little triggered by hearing coughs. This episode is titled When You're Lost in the Darkness, which is the first part of the Firefly's mantra. That mantra ends with, look for the light. Here, Sarah gets distracted from the light by what? A cough. In the repair shop, the phone rings in the beginning of the scene in the background, and then a moment later, that Lebanese co-owner closes early, rushes Sarah out of there, suggesting that that call was from family in the Middle East, alerting her to how bad things are getting. And then in her neighbor's house behind Sarah, Nana contorts and her mouth opens wide as that fungus infection takes hold of her body. But she stays out of focus, so we can't really tell what's happening, which makes it even creepier. It reminds me a lot of that scene in It Chapter 2 when Pennywise takes the form of the old woman creeping in the background behind Bev. Now, Nana also refuses to eat in this scene. Remember earlier, she refused to eat those biscuits, which director Craig Mazin hinted might be some breadcrumbs here that are gonna come back later. Like there might be another symptom to the fungal infection being loss of appetite, because the fungus is really eating your flesh from the inside. It doesn't need other food. Sarah borrows the DVD Curtis and Viper 2, which is a reference to the games, Joel's favorite 80s action movie that gets referenced.
What movie you guys gonna watch? What's Joel into?
Curtis and Viper 2. That's the one that's been on my radar for a while.
Now later that night when Sarah enters the house, which by the way, why would you do this? Notice how the wheelchair on the far right is empty. Just a little concerning sign that that fungus is now puppeting Nana's motor functions. It's just unsettling to realize that this fungus in a way fixes our physical ailments to make us more mobile. Now Brad Leland is actually Buddy Garrity from Friday Night Lights. Love seeing him show up here, and he does such a great job acting this moment. Now what we think is his paralyzing fear in his wide eyes is actually the fungus taking over, because later when we see him in the street, he attacks someone else. He too is infected here. Now the tendrils that snake out of Nana's mouth are even more sickening in my opinion than the spores of the game. But a little physical detail here, I love how they stick to the victim's wound as Nana raises her head. So the first time we see a bite happen, it's not a cannibalistic zombie bite. She's not trying to feast on her brains. It's a parasite transferring from one host, burrowing into the bloodstream of a new host. Now this truck sequence is awesome. It plays out similarly to the game. We see the burning farmhouse, the way they pass the family, leaving them behind, all the highways blocked off. But Craig Mazin shoots this in these amazing long takes. There's a 50-second shot from just inside the truck, in which they must have perfectly timed and choreographed people running down the street lit by the truck's headlights. The fact that we stay in the chaos of the truck reminds us a lot of the amazing chaotic car long take of Children of Men. I like how it's a movie screening of Midnight Madness erupting into the street. And then as the truck backs up, the entire time in the sky, I didn't notice this the first time I looked at it, you can totally see the 747 losing control up above their heads, but we don't really notice what's happening until too late because of all the chaos that's happening around us. Actually, it's that plane's front wheel that breaks off and ricochets off the building and wrecks their truck. Afterward, Tommy gets separated as Joel and Sarah are pinned on, where's that? Pioneer Way. Joel will become a bit of a westward moving pioneer on this series. But as in the game, they are stopped by a soldier who gets the order to kill them, and Joel, who either he or his brother Tommy were a Desert Storm veteran, knows what it looks like when a soldier gets a message to kill. The soldier fires on them, hitting Sarah, and Tommy kills off the soldier before he can kill Joel. Sarah bleeds out and dies. But there is something interesting that happens here. We don't actually see the exact moment Sarah dies. The camera swings over to Tommy, whose voice cracks as he says his brother's name. And then when we swing back to Sarah, her eyes are lifeless. So then we jump to 20 years later in the Boston quarantine zone, following another kid that we don't stay with for too long. They wheel him in and they give him a FEDRA patch to hold. So FEDRA is the Federal Disaster Response Agency, a FEMA-like agency from the game that becomes the country's governing military authority now. This kid sees a poster explaining how long the infection takes based on where the wound is on the body, the leg being the longest, which is where this kid's wound is. We don't even know if this kid can read, like he clearly doesn't understand what's going on, and it's especially cruel how this soldier hides her expression after he tests positive.
What if I told you that after we gave you some medicine, we're gonna find you your favorite food to eat?
And later, this poor kid is identified by his bright green shoelaces, which I think is a nod to Schindler's List when that girl in the red coat is later identified on a pile of corpses that's being carted over to be burned. And notice how, despite shoelaces being a hot commodity in the QZ, they do not scavenge this boy's shoelaces, either out of respect or maybe out of caution. Now, in the game, the infection testing process is actually revealed by an adult man testing positive in the QZ, and he gets shot right there. But this more emotionally brutal death was added to get parallelism between Joel cradling Sarah, and now Joel is numb as he cradles this dead boy. This actually was the original ending of this episode, before HBO suggested taking more time to build out the present day, and most importantly to introduce Joel to Ellie. Joel takes the worst jobs, like this one, and sewer maintenance, perhaps sewer maintenance to learn what the best smuggling routes are, but really also to just get the most valuable ration card so that he can bribe the soldiers. He passes some wanted posters offering a reward for Marlene. Posters like these appear in the QZ in the game. We see some amputees wearing Desert Storm shirts and a guy in a Gore Lieberman shirt for the Democratic candidates in the 2000 election, Al Gore and Joe Lieberman. All of their fashion and technology froze in the early 2000s when everything fell apart. We also see some guys assigning to paint over some graffiti left by the Fireflies. That's their sigil, and we know that they're recruiting from throughout the QZ. The amputees we see might be a world detail of people having cut off wounded limbs to prevent infection. In the game, it's not totally clear if amputation works like that. In the Left Behind game, Ellis had his arm amputated, but we never really find out for sure if it worked because he ended up bleeding out before they could find out. 3 trespassers are hung in North Square. You can see signs for North Square. In real life Boston, this is a historic area. Well, the whole city's a historic area, but this is a special area where Paul Revere's house is. These kinds of executions by British soldiers were part of what agitated Americans to revolt in Revere's time. Joel meets up with this one soldier, and we see this soldier's hand twitching, showing how bad he's jonesing for these pills, but also how he will have a very itchy trigger finger later. Joel knows how bad this soldier is addicted.
Or I could just shoot you.
Yeah, but then what would you do?
I love the detail that Joel needs the bag back because plastic bags without holes in them would be something in limited supply. As in the game, Joel is a smuggler who's always holding on to odds and ends that he can workshop into useful tools. Tess chats with Robert, whose guys jumped her, about a car battery that she paid for and he sold to someone else, a car battery that we later learned didn't even work. Now in the game, it's actually a cache of guns that Robert scammed from Joel and Tess. But this show seems to establish Joel and Tess as a bit less bloodthirsty and also wants to establish a stronger bond between Joel and his brother Tommy, and Joel having to travel westward to find Tommy before he ever meets Ellie. Ultimately, this introduces Joel as, at first, a more peaceful, protective figure, which Pedro Pascal is so good at, as Din Djarin on The Mandalorian. We meet Ellie, who initially goes under the alias of Veronica, played by Bella Ramsey, Lyanna Mormont from Game of Thrones. The Fireflies have chained her up and they test her cognitive and motor functions. Why are they doing this? Well, we later learn that she has been infected, and they're trying to prove that the infection didn't really affect her. Now, this cell only has "when you're lost in the darkness" written on red on the wall, but not the full phrase, like it's written in yellow outside in the area where Joel meets up with the soldier. It's just a way of showing how the Fireflies do not need the full propaganda internally, just bits and pieces of it to remind them of their mission, but in different contexts. Now, this guy who operates the long-distance radio takes Joel's cigarettes, which remember was the $5 extra that Joel got from the soldier. The radio operator takes the cigarettes before he tells Joel that he just heard nothing from Tommy, which kind of sucks. Joel just had to pay for bad news. It's any answer at all that costs the payment. So Joel drunkenly plots a westward trip to find Tommy, and we see the watch that Sarah repaired, its face broken in 2 spots. Now, when Jess joins him in bed, she rolls him away from her so that he won't see her facial wounds right away and get worked up when he's super drunk and high. Like throughout the morning, he doesn't even notice until he raises his head to see her face the next morning during breakfast. Now, I might be wrong, but that woman they passed in the wheelchair might be the same pregnant woman who radioed her parent earlier that they were about to be a grandparent. It's hard to tell if the woman in the wheelchair has her baby bump still. I don't really know what happened. I just hope that pregnant woman ended up being okay. Marlene gives Ellie this knife that Ellie from here forward is extremely attached to, and Marlene reveals that she knows her name is not Veronica and that she was actually the one who put Ellie in the Fedra military school. Marlene also brings up someone named Riley. There's a lot more to all this that I will bring up at the end in the spoiler section. Joel and Tess are scared when they find a recent infected victim.
You think he came down after he was infected?
Maybe down here is where he was infected.
Now, beyond the yuck of the Cordyceps outgrowth, the fact that this person was pinned against a wall, I think is what is most unnerving about this. It's as if he was on the ground when he died, and then the fungus lifted his corpse up as it grew to find other victims. Joel and Tess find Robert and his guys already dead, and Marlene and her crew already wounded. It's really interesting that we don't see this go down. We come upon it after. Just like we didn't really see any initial conflict between Robert's crew and Tess, we didn't see those trespassers actually get hanged. Think about it, this is HBO. They can get as violent as they want. But in the second half of this episode, they particularly withhold the violence. The violence in the QZ in the second half of this episode is rarely ever shown happening. It's more quiet, it's hinted at. Crime scenes stumbled upon after the fact, not explicitly shown. And I'm gonna explain why in a bit. Ellie finds Joel's local radio and his book of Billboard #1 hits with this code sheet for communications from Bill and Frank, 60s songs, meaning nothing new, 70s songs, meaning new stock is in, and 80s songs Ellie's able to deduce later using Wham's Wake Me Up to trick Joel, meaning trouble out there. And this was after Joel went in and out of sleep to the sounds of Sarah's dying breaths. Before, when he slept, when he was drunk and loaded, he heard his brother Tommy shouting his name, which is probably a memory from their past fight. So Joel and Tess and Ellie head out past the wall where they're stopped by that druggy soldier from before, who tests Ellie to learn that she is positive. So Ellie stabs him with a knife, and Joel, flashing back to the parallel moment when he faced a soldier who killed his daughter, finally lets his rage boil over and he snaps. This is what Marlene referred to by what they're capable of, and why this episode held off showing us Joel being violent in this modern era until this moment, despite the early section of the game here showing Joel and Tess disposing of and killing a ton of guys. Instead, we just get this shocking and singular punctuated moment of violence from our hero that feels especially earned, grounded in the most devastating loss in his life, and directly motivating why protecting Ellie is so important to him. And specifically what triggered the memory for him was the light. He was blinded by this soldier's flashlight just like he was blinded by the headlights back in Texas, because when you're lost in the darkness, you must look for the light. Craig Mazin had an interesting point about Ellie in this moment.
When Ellie watches him beating a man to death, she is activated. Earlier in the episode, when Sarah sees him killing this old woman who's infected, who he has to kill,
You killed her.
she cries. Ellie likes it.
And in the companion podcast from HBO, Mazin talked about this series being a love story, but how unconditional love can be a very dangerous thing.
We will continue to come back to the notion that love conquers all, and that's problematic. That we think of love as this solely positive thing, a beautiful thing, and it is. But love, especially the love that a parent has for a child, is primal, and it can lead to the most intense fear, and the most intense fear can lead to the most intense behavior, including violence. And if you scratch the surface of tribalism, racism, xenophobia, you will find love. Love is not always good.
And the music that plays over this ending comes from Joel's local radio from Bill and Frank, Depeche Mode's Never Let Me Down Again, an 80s track meaning danger is ahead. Now, Depeche Mode's song is about taking a ride with your best friend, but that friend is really addiction. So this bond forming between Ellie and Joel, not necessarily a healthy thing. And Mazin promises that we will hear this song again this season at a key moment. The toppled towers that they head toward on their way to the State House compare to the opening titles, The Road of the Fungus spreading toward its towering stalks, because the path before all these characters is truly infected. Now onto our spoiler corner for folks more familiar with the games and comics, want to talk about these details, or just people who don't really give a shit. So Marlene actually knew Ellie's mother, Anna, long before Ellie was wounded and infected. This switchblade used to belong to Anna, as we learn in the prequel comics American Dreams, and becomes Ellie's primary weapon in the games. That could be why she's so pissed when Joel steps on it and swipes it away. He's essentially stepping on her mother's memory. However, in this show, it seems like Ellie did not know Marlene before Ellie was captured by the Fireflies. It seems like her mother's relationship with Marlene is a full mystery to her. Now, Riley was Ellie's teenage partner from the Left Behind DLC that was initially referenced in the Last of Us game. This is the girl she snuck out with and hung out with at the mall, which is where they were both infected, but Ellie survived. Riley will appear later in the season, played by Storm Reed. There's actually a shot in the trailer of them taking a photo together. I'm so excited for this show. I will be breaking down the Easter eggs every Monday following our after shows coming out on Sunday nights. A reminder to subscribe to New Rockstars' new channel, The Deep Dive, launching February 17th with deeper investigations from me every week. You can follow it on all socials at DeepDiveNR. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at EA Voss. Follow New Rockstars and subscribe to New Rockstars for breakdowns and theories of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.